Everybody. I think everybody's here that said they were going to be here. Welcome to this meeting in a chamber that's now able to recognise people more easily instead of hiding behind screens all over the place. Thank you. So can we have any apologies for absence, please?
We have apologies from Councillor Abdul Lois.
Thank you. I think we've still got one member missing, but I think we need to start on time with regards to that. Have we the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 5 to 8? Anybody got any concerns about me signing that as a correct meeting discretion? No comments in that case. I can sign them. Sorry.
Can I just ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Is that okay? So I've not got any concerns. It was just I wanted to ask if the taxi drivers that had already paid the increase were reimbursed. Has that happened? Do we know?
Do we have any feedback on that?
I think that's for my colleagues in licensing, please.
Yeah, so we agreed that obviously we're going to keep the previous year's fees for the taxi drivers, and those that had already paid the increase would be reimbursed the extra. And I just wanted to check that that's actually happened.
I have to check. I don't know whether it's been reimbursed.
I think Stephen can answer.
Stephen?
Thanks, Chairman.
Good evening.
The short answer is no. The executive made a decision that they wouldn't continue to subsidise taxi licensing and that they would revert to the fares that were originally subscribed. So there will be no refunds. It's on the basis that taxi drivers can apply for COVID support, COVID monies for support, and in fact have been doing so. So there was an executive decision not to subsidise the taxi drivers this year.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so apart from that, I'll sign that as a for record, please.
Sorry, could I just ask, when was that decision made? That wasn't in an exec meeting, was it? We weren't aware that the exec had turned down the recommendation of this committee. Has anyone got any information as to when and how that decision was made, please, by the executive?
I don't think that we've been told about that. I mean, presumably it's a decision has gone elsewhere.
I think the decision not to continue with the subsidy was made. I don't know about any refund, but to not continue with the subsidy. When we gave this subsidy, it was to help through a rather difficult period that taxi drivers were experiencing. And now, of course, the taxi drivers are generally back to where they were. And as Stephen said, if they are still facing difficulties, they can apply for the COVID grant. But
just to clarify, this was the fees, the increase in fees. So the increase in fees, we agreed that we weren't going to increase. I'm going to keep them at previous year's rate, but they'd already been increased at the time of the decision. So some taxi drivers would have already paid the increase, and it was agreed by this committee that we would revert to the previous year's fees, and anyone that had paid would be reimbursed the difference. Is that the aspect that's been overridden by the executive, or are we getting things confused here?
If it helps, Chairman, the position is that the original decision that was made by the executive is going to hold fast. So the recommendation of this committee to apply the subsidy hasn't been taken on. I'm afraid I can't help with where that decision was exactly. I'm going to have to go back and find that, but I can assure you that is the decision, and therefore those that have paid the license fee that was agreed by the executive won't be getting a refund, because that is the fee that will be set. Obviously, that decision predates me, but I'll try and I'll get an answer as to exactly where and how that decision was made. Thank you.
I don't think it does predate you. It was only the last meeting, which was in July. And I don't want us to get confused between subsidy and the licence fees, what we're talking about.
Can I just take Chris with?
Are we getting confused with the years here? These two different years. I mean, the refund was where I think we brought the subsidy in during the year, during the financial year. And so, and those people who had already paid were given the money back. Otherwise, some of the taxi drivers would be paying more than others. And I think, are we this the executive? We're talking about 21 to 22, and what you're talking about is 20 to 21. So
It's just to clarify. I think
I'm not quite sure, but I'm just suggesting that maybe that's might explain it.
so. It's in the last meeting. The meeting previous to that, we asked about freezing the licence fee for taxi drivers and not to increase it. And a paper was brought to us last time to look at some further detail. We made a decision that we were going to freeze the fee at the previous year and not increase it. But because we made the decision as a committee after the change in financial year, the fee had already gone up. It was to revert back to the previous year's fee, and it was agreed that anyone who had paid that increase of fee would be reimbursed the difference. We're not talking about subsidy here, we're talking about the licence fee, and this was agreed in the last meeting in July, whenever it was. Is that correct, Rachel? Yeah. So I think there's some confusion here.
It's quite clearly shown on page 8 of the agenda. It starts with Councillor Burgess proposed that fees for private hire vehicles and hackney carriages be held at 2021 levels. She was seconded by Councillor Kerr. And then we go through, upon the vote, members voted in favour of Councillor Burgess's proposal. Resolve that the fees for private hire vehicles and hackney carriages will be held at 2021 levels and any fees already paid will be refunded. And that is the last part of that sentence that Sarah's asking about. Have those taxi drivers who paid the extra, what was it 28, 40 pounds, 42 pounds or something, have they had that refunded? That's the question.
Can I take Rachel now before we go back?
I've actually got nothing to add. What Sarah and Lindsay have said is absolutely correct. So it would be good to know the situation from the officers and also when that decision was made by the executive.
So I can see Sean's.
Sean, I gather you want to say something on this.
Yeah, Chair, if I could just try and shed some clarity about this. So you're quite right. There was a discussion, obviously, at the last meeting, as the members have said, about basically pegging the fees effectively at the previous year's levels. We did take that away from the meeting, as basically suggested, because obviously it's not within the gift of this committee to set fees or to reduce fees. It is only in the gift of the committee to recommend something. We did take that away, and I think it's fair to say, Stephen, there was no appetite to take that up. I think that's where we got to, so it didn't even get as far as executive for a decision. Is that would that be the correct position, Stephen?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, just to confirm that is exactly correct. Obviously, it is executive members that had no appetite for that. So although there wasn't an exec decision as such, the executive members had made it clear that there was no appetite for that, and they wanted to remain where they were with the fees that had originally been set.
Doesn't feel constitutional. Sorry.
No, that doesn't sound right at all. I mean, this is a public meeting. I appreciate we are not decision making, we make recommendations, but that should have formally gone to the executive, and for there to be no public meeting to decide otherwise, that something doesn't smell right here. Sorry.
Well, I think that I understand the issue. I don't think we're going to resolve that right now, but I think we need to have a report coming back just as to the reasons why it didn't take place, so that we can actually act on that. Because at the moment it's almost hearsay we're getting on this.
Chair, I'm very happy to come back and make sure that all the loose ends are tied up and that there is a proper decision made on this and it's reported back to the next committee.
Okay.
That would be good. Can I just confirm, was it an individual exec member that made the decision, or was it collective?
It's not for me to talk about the politics of this, but I think it's fair to say it was collective.
Right. Okay.
But there's two members of the exec here.
Yeah, well, we've heard that. I think that we need to wait and see now what we've got here, because we need to, because there seems to be some confusion about exactly what areas of refund are actually taking place as far as that's concerned.
Sorry, there's 3 members of executive.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think we need to check to see that this was an official decision on behalf of the executive members. I'm not sure about that, so I think that we can take that, and we need to look into that for the next meeting. Okay, so if we can move on to, didn't have any declarations of interest. In that case, have we had any public questions? No public questions. Any member questions received? No. Thank you. Right, in that case, we move to item 14, adoption of the statement of gambling principles. So, what are officers going to be speaking on this issue? Silence.
Sorry, Chairman. Yes, we have David Lucas with us this evening, who, as members may recall, came and kindly explained the document that he had prepared and is with us this evening. So he will go through the report and explain further.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me back. And I've read the report, and I'm grateful for the papers being provided beforehand. If you've had the opportunity to look through the report, you'll see that the comments that were made when the draft statement of policy was considered have been incorporated, and the draft in its amended form went out for consultation. There have been some comments received back, and I think they're in Appendix B. I've again had the opportunity to have a look at those comments, and I've put a response to each of the comments in the third column. It's really a question of I think just a couple of points really. The language that's used. I don't think that the amendments proposed would have any fundamental effect upon the statement of policy, but I have explained or responded to each of the points, and in a couple of them I've suggested some slightly different wording. It's clearly, as the report says, it's a matter for yourself. So I'm looking to the left because I've got another screen with your report on another laptop. So it really is a question of whether you wish to accept the proposed the comments that are made and the amendments that are suggested as proposed, or in accordance with my response. And hopefully I've explained why I've adopted the form of wording that I have. Other than that, members, I think it's a case of have you got any questions that I can assist you with? Thank you.
Just one comment really. You've got the MCA as an acronym that should be fully expanded as per the other acronyms in the document.
Thank you.
I do apologise. I thought I'd covered them all, but yes, I totally agree.
Thank you. Paul, we're going to put your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On page 11, paragraph 2.5, it states that the number of responses was very low, which would indicate that those consulted were in agreement with the content. That's rather an assumption to me. And I think a good measure would be actually asking anybody you consult as a stakeholder directly, you ask them to respond to say, A, about they've received the consultation, and B, do they have any comments to make, or respond with no comments to make. So at least then you've got a bit of more of a measure. Reference to questions that you've set out as well. There is a response on Appendix A from the head of adult safeguarding, which I felt was actually suitable for the document. So that's mine. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to come back on that one?
Sorry, I'm just, was that in Appendix A, you say? I'm just looking for that. Appendix A is the draft statement of gambling principles. Appendix B is the other responses, councillor.
Yeah, Appendix A, it's got respondent head of adult safeguarding.
Oh, yeah.
Governance, yeah.
It's just the way that they've been printed out. Yes, I've got
Yeah.
you. Yes. And there are three particular comments there. Which one in particular, councillor, are you looking at? Is it page 11, page 12, or page 13?
All three of those I felt was acceptable.
Yeah, and if you look at my responses, they're my responses in the column on the right. I don't disagree with any of them. I've just, for example, in the first one, I've just explained why I've used that particular phrase, vulnerable adult centres, because it's consistent with the phrase or the expression that's used by the Gambling Commission. But as I said, I don't have a problem with a different form of words, providing the meaning is clear. And then the second one, again, my response, I wouldn't have any objection to let's look to the rewording, but I've suggested a slightly different form to the wording that's been suggested in the response, and then again slightly different form of wording to that suggested in the response is in my comment. So I don't disagree. Just as summing up, members, councillor, I don't disagree with any of them. I've just, if you like, suggested a slightly different form of wording. I think it means the same. It's whichever you accept.
Okay. Rachel, did you? Okay.
What is the
Sarah.
level?
Oh, Michelle, sorry.
What is the level of addiction to gambling, and how does that compare to cocaine and other narcotics? Because gamblers are just as addictive as a lot of drugs.
Yeah.
We're not selling heroin on the street, but we're selling gambling on the street. What's the level of it? There's no mention of that any place in there. And what treatment do they have for people who are having the problem? Things like that.
Yeah.
I think quite simply, public health is not one of the three licensing objectives in this act. It's very prescriptive as to the areas that you're allowed to go into, and just very simply, they are keeping crime and disorder out of gambling, making sure that gambling is fair and open, and protecting children and vulnerable persons. Public health in its own right is not one of those objectives. So it's one of those areas where gambling operators must be aware of their need to protect vulnerable people, but the actual extent to which public health and that particular sector and the number of people who suffer from addiction is not actually something that you can legitimately include in your policy under the Act. I accept it is of concern. I don't disagree with that, but it's not, strictly speaking, it's not something that you can cover in your policy document. As far as the actual current statistics are concerned, there was a report about 2 weeks ago, and I can send the link through. The NHS published it through one of their departments, looking at the level of gambling addiction. The statistics, I have to say, have attracted some criticism, but nevertheless, they are reasonably reliable and give you a current picture. The Gambling Commission also publish regular information around the subject, but as I say, it's not something that you can you can include in your statement of policy, I'm afraid.
So it'll be okay to sell cocaine and heroin and other addictive drugs because it wouldn't be a public statement of their addiction.
Alcohol's addictive, but it's allowed. You can sell it. I'm not being glib. It's just that yes, it's a fact of life, and there are regulations, there are restrictions, there are regimes that control these things. Licensing Act, the Gambling Act, but we have to work within the parameters that are set within the particular piece of legislation, I'm afraid.
Shahid.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, David, for the report. Two questions. On page 10, it clearly highlights the objectives, which you just highlighted earlier on as well, preventing gambling from being source of crime, and there are two others as well. What measures do we have in place to actually measure those objectives? Whether we've met those objectives or not, number one. And if yes, to what extent? And the second question is that I understand this has to be, statement of gambling principles has to be issued every 3 years. Last time it was done in 2018. That's why we're now doing the updated version of it. Did we do a review of the last 3 years? What are the lessons learned? How many actually violations happened? Etc. And what were the what were done as a result of that? So in other words, a review of the last years, how well did we do in terms of implementation of these gambling principles? So the reason I'm saying that, obviously we have a principle, yes, this is what needs to happen, but the real impact which is when we implement these policies. And I was keen to know how well were they implemented in the last 3 years and what were the lessons learned from that. Thank you.
Okay, I think to explain that, I need to just give you a bit of background to how this regime works. Gambling operators are regulated by two bodies, local authorities, licensing authorities such as yourself, and also the Gambling Commission. The Gambling Commission regulate the operators, so they will regulate the way in which companies and individuals provide commercial gambling activities. Licensing authorities are given the responsibility under this legislation, the Gambling Act 2005, to regulate the actual physical premises, and that's the only thing that you have control over, so that there is this distinction between the operator as to whether they're suitable to provide gambling and then whether the premises are suitable to provide gambling, which is what you deal with and what your policy is all about. Now, the measurement of how the gambling objectives are actually promoted, again, the measurement is divided between the two. The Gambling Commission, I have to say, came in for a lot of criticism from central government. Various reports were critical, very critical of the Commission, and one of the criticisms was the fact that they are not providing the sort of information that that you've requested. How do they actually measure the success of the Gambling Act, and how do you measure whether the objectives are being properly promoted? Now, just going off a slight tangent, there is a review of the Gambling Act at the moment, and that is looking at the Gambling Commission and the way they perform their particular task, including the responsibility to promote the objectives. Coming back to you as the licensing authority, there is a power. The Act is permissive, basically, but there is a balancing a balancing power given to authorities to review licenses, and there are over 50 criminal offences created by the Act. That's the balance, if you like, against that permissive nature of the legislation. The review power is very rarely used because actual premises don't very often give rise to concern. So you see very few councils actually reviewing premises license under this legislation. It's very different to the Licensing Act, I have to say. And you see very few, in actual fact, very few contested hearings under the Gambling Act, because the premises themselves and the way they're operated don't tend to give rise to a lot of problems. Police authorities around the country, well, England, Wales and Scotland, this relates to Great Britain, have very low statistics about issues being created by premises. Operators, that's a different matter. They're dealt with by the Gambling Commission, and there have been some very high profile cases where the Commission have actually suspended or revoked licenses, operating licenses, and imposed substantial financial penalties. The highest penalty recently was a land-based casino operator was ordered to pay £13 million. So there, I'm sorry to go on, but as I say, there is this distinction between the two regulators and what they regulate and the action that's being taken. Premises on the whole don't tend to give rise to a lot of issues. That's a long answer. I'm sorry about that, but I hope that's provided the information that you were seeking.
Does that satisfy you, Shahid?
Can I come back, Chair? If maybe I've misunderstood it. I'd asked two questions, and I think if I'm right understanding, the answer to both questions is no. So there wasn't a review done for the last 3 years, as you said, highlighted. This is not normally done because of, this is, if it's only problem occurs, we will know about it, and there'll be sanction. And also in terms of the measuring of the objectives, it doesn't seem to be very clear that whether we actually, or whether we have a mechanism in place where we can measure these objectives, or whether, whether they were achieved or not. So I think my question would be, right, like any learning organization, any policy, any strategy we implement, surely there must be a review of it. How did we do? What did we do well? What didn't go well? What can we learn? And how can we improve next time? And also setting with the objectives as well. What is the point of setting objectives in the first place if you cannot measure them? There is no mechanism in place. And how do you know whether you achieve those objectives or not? So this is not actually, David, yourself, but I'm just saying that, if it's not being done, then surely this must be in place to measure those objectives. And if you're going to have this policy for the next 3 years, then we should have mechanism in place where we can say in 3 years' time that yes, these objectives were set, and yes, we achieved them, or no, we didn't achieve them, or we achieved them, but this is to some extent, etc., etc. Do you see this as a fair comment?
Well, I understand what you're saying about measurement. The objectives are obviously set by central government. I think what I'd say is the way in which you can measure whether or not the objectives are being promoted in your particular area is by reference to the statistics that will be available from your own licensing department. So it'll be the number of applications that have been received, how many have been contested, if any, how many have been refused, because any action that's taken in respect of a premises license, either refusal or a review application, you'll have all that information. That action, Councillor, has got to be based on the promotion of the licensing objectives. It's the only basis on which you can do that, oppose an application or review an existing license. So you would know if there were any issues within your authority, because those statistics would be available. And I'm pretty sure, I don't get involved in these, there has to be regular annual reporting by each licensing authority to the Gambling Commission. And I think within those statistics, it will deal with the number of applications and possibly the number of reviews. So you would know if there were complaints about gambling premises within your district, because they would be revealed by those statistics. Hopefully that's answered the question. That's one of the ways that the Commission uses to measure what's happening. Sorry, Sean.
Yeah, I was just going to add, Chair, if I may. So obviously on the next item, which is the annual review for the committee, basically of activity in relation to licensing matters, there are some details of numbers of license and things like that were granted. I mean, we'll come on to that when we come on to that paper, but what you will see is actually the numbers are falling generally in certain areas. So things like betting shops have been closing down. And overall, basically, it is not a very great number of premises that we're looking at. And I could bring Julia in here, but I think it's fair to say, Julia, we don't get many complaints, if any at all. And I can say also, from my point of view, in all my time involved with licensing, I've only ever seen one review of a gambling licensing premise application. And obviously, I mean, that wasn't in this authority, but I've only ever seen the one review. As David has said, we judge the applications against the criteria that are laid for basically assessing applications, and most of them, as David has said, it's permissive, are granted, unless basically there are objections against the licensing objectives, or there is something comes up during the course of the licensing period. I think it's probably about a fair summary of where we are, I think, isn't it, David, in terms of the application of the Act.
Great, thank you. Dara?
Thank you. Thank you, David, as well, for obviously bringing this back again and taking on board the comments from last time as well. The wording in 1.6 interested parties, much happier with, and 1.7 information exchange. Again, that sounds a lot better. I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, it's covered by data protection laws, but we can't assume that everybody knows and understands that in detail. So to spell it out is really important. So thank you for putting that in. And Appendix C, the scheme of delegations, is so much clearer now. So thank you. It's about making this user friendly, so people understand we're not all experts in the law. The responses to the consultation, can I just clarify firstly, that was it? That was the only response we got, or were there other responses that didn't have any suggestions, or was it just those?
They were the only responses. I can tell you that in my experience, the gambling policies do not attract many, if any, responses in a lot of cases. But I can tell you that they are scrutinised very carefully by two particular sectors. The Gambling Commission look at them just to keep an eye on you and make sure you're doing everything properly. And operators look at them carefully. And those two sectors, they do scrutinise them very carefully. And if there were any concerns, rest assured they raise them. But as far as I'm aware, these are the only comments that have been received. Is that right, Sean?
Yeah, and in fact, actually, I think, I mean, Moira's on the call here, but I think in one of the authorities, so we consulted in all three authorities at the same time because they're all coming up for renewal. I think, Moira, is it fair to say, I think one of them we had no responses?
That's correct, yes.
And the other we had basically one?
One and two to say no objections.
And two to say of no objection. So what we're seeing here is not unusual, basically. It isn't like the licensing act one where you may get far more interest, but as David has said, they are of interest to those people that regulate or are regulated by the act and the relevant policies.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify that because there was a bit of a mix-up in the way this was labelled. It's not written as Appendix B, so I wasn't sure if I was actually missing something as well. So no, that's fine. On the suggestions from Adult Social Care and your comments, on the first one, I appreciate that the vulnerable adult centres is what's in the legal terminology. As this is a user-facing document, I do agree with the comment from the consultee about changing that slightly. As you say, this needs to be readable by people, and I think I agree there with what they've suggested. And the other ones, the suggestions that you've made in response, absolutely fine. I agree with Councillor Dennis about just articulating the acronym MCA. And I also wonder actually about putting that the term vulnerable persons into the glossary as well. So I don't think I saw it there. So it's actually there and clear. But otherwise, I think that all makes sense, and I think it's quite happy with this. So thank you.
Thank you. Lindsay.
Thank you. I hate variations. I want to follow on from what Shahid was saying, because I had similar thoughts as we went through it. One is, where do we have a list of all the gambling sites in the borough? And then when it comes to the scheme of delegations, I've been on the licensing committee for a number of years, and we've got activities coming up under the subcommittee. And maybe I'm not involved in subcommittees, but I have over the last few years had quite a few. And I haven't and cannot remember anything to do with the gambling activity at all coming to any form of subcommittee. I might be wrong, but I don't remember it. And I think that might be your comment about there's not very much activity. So if there's not much activity, I'm a little bit concerned as to the actual function of this document, because it's so top level. And when you read it, it sort of says, like, I was reading some sections where it was sort of, there's a balance issue and all sorts of things. I'm not clear with this document what we actually do with it, because it's a list of things, and it's a list of things we take notice of. We've got a scheme of delegations, but I haven't seen any activities that actually indicate that anything happens. And I might be wrong, but you know, you've been a long time on this committee too. And can you remember anything coming through on gambling? I can't. But if there has been, then fine. But I haven't had anything. You have. You've been on a subcommittee. Right. Okay, something has. But I just want to understand how this all fits in and what it is we do with this. Because if all what we're doing is putting a document together, because we have a review every 3 years, I like to understand what teeth has it got, what angles has it got, and what do we use it for. And I think that follows on from what Shahid was saying, because I'm a little bit puzzled by it. It feels very sort of very top level.
I think, Chair, do you want me to respond to that?
Yes, please, yeah.
Yes, Councillor. I think as far as the actual number of premises is concerned, I think that's just been mentioned, and I think you've got that in a later item possibly. Certainly, the number of gambling premises within each licensing authority is much less than under the Licensing Act. There are fewer licensed gambling premises. I think the other point is that, and possibly a reflection of that, is the fact that there are very, very few contested applications that go to subcommittees in any areas. I do a lot of training around the country, and whenever I do training, I talk about hearings. But when I actually ask licensing officers if they've had a hearing in their area, very few of them have. It's just, it's the fact that it's very prescriptive. You have to, if you're opposing an application, bring your opposition within one of the licensing objectives, one or more of them, and it has to be evidence-based. Because of that restricted ability to oppose applications, there are very few contested. So it doesn't surprise me, Councillor, that you're saying, and you're totally consistent with other areas, you have very few contested matters going to subcommittees under this legislation. However, the policy is something that has to be prepared. It's a requirement placed on licensing authorities by the Act, and it's there to assist everybody that's involved in the administration of the Act. So anybody, not just yourselves, but the officers, and don't forget, if there aren't any objections, the officers will deal with the applications under delegated powers, but they still need this policy document to provide the guidance to how they administer the regime. But anybody looking at it, whether it's a member of the public, another business, a license, an operator who's thinking of coming into the area, it's there, and it's available to anybody, the police, the other responsible authorities. It's for their benefit, for all of them. They can use this document to see how you administer the license, the Gambling Act, sorry, and license commercial gambling premises in your particular area. That's how it works.
Okay. I think I've got Michael next.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Mine is going back to the responses, and I think going forward to any consultation, you want as higher level response as you can possibly get. But I mean, it does set out here that it's a low level, and there was a point raised earlier on about this. And I'm just really wondering, the rate of response with it being low, how does that compare to any previous consultations that we've done? I mean, usually on a consultation, I think if you get 10%, you're doing pretty well. So I'm just kind of wondering what the view is on that, and if you have any background on that, please.
Personally speaking, I don't, other than, as I said earlier, in my experience, I couldn't give you statistics, but in my experience, the response to Gambling Act policy statements, consultations, let's say, is very, very low. It's just the nature of the beast. I think if you went back, bearing in mind you've been doing this every 3 years since 2006-7 when it first came in, I think you'll probably find that you've had that experience, as I say, every 3 years when you've consulted previously. I'd be very surprised if this is any different this time around.
Okay, thank you. I think Rochelle next. Yeah,
This is more of a question. Page 11.2.5 says responses to the consultation received is set out in Appendix B to the report. Page 12 says there's an Appendix A and Appendix B, draft statement and responses to the consultation. Appendix A is on page 47. It just says the list of the consultees. It doesn't say draft statement of the response to the consultation. Appendix B is a map of Woking. And then Appendix C is followed by that. I'm just trying to figure out what the heck is going on, because it looks like page 13 is actually the only response, and it's not an appendix listed any place. So what actually is the appendixes? Or did somebody not actually read what they were writing? The appendix are here, and there's nothing in them. But the statement is here, which is not part of the appendix.
I can help with that. The appendices that Rochelle's referencing are the appendices to the actual appendix. As in, that's the statement of principles, and it's the appendices that go with that. As I mentioned earlier, there's obviously been an error with the labelling.
Okay. Because the Appendix A says list of consultees, which is exactly what it says on page 12, but the Appendix B doesn't. So somebody,
thank you. Chris.
Something along the way didn't happen.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to comment on page 13 on the page 11 suggestion. I don't think the suggestion actually changes things very much, changing vulnerable adult centres into buildings which house services for vulnerable adults. I think it means much the same thing. But I'm more concerned with the fact that the exact phrase vulnerable adult centres is also in the guidance to licensing authorities. There's a link there. I don't know what the guidance says about this particular phrase, but it may go into some detail. And while the link's there, we can look that up and be sure what we mean by a vulnerable adult centre. It's also possible that the definition of that in the guidance might be amended in the future. And I think in that case, that would implicitly modify our statement of gambling principles. So I think that link may be important, and just modifying the wording for no very good reason, as I see it, I don't think it's a very sensible way forward. Maybe there are other phrases as well that are linked between the two documents, that we ought to preserve as well. Thank you.
Any comment on that?
Only to say that I used that phrase because it was consistent, and for that reason, rather than having different phrases used. But I think it's really a case of making sure that you have a statement that if people read it, they understand what it says. It's a standalone document. You can use different language. I use that language because it's consistent. But at the end of the day, I can understand the need or the desire on your part to make sure that you have a document that people understand. So that's why I said I don't have any issues if you wanted to change the wording, as long as it's clear what you're referring to.
Okay, thank you. I think everybody's spoken now who wants to. So can I ask those of you in favour of us adopting this statement of gambling principles, please raise your hand. Thank you. Any against? Thank you. Chris? Sorry? You wanted to oppose the...
Yeah, sorry. In taking the vote, you were proposition to accept the 3 amendments on page 13.
Okay.
Is that right? So,
yes.
I thought you might have taken them individually, the amendments, because I don't wish to approve the first one. But I can see there's a majority for them all, so
okay.
Not much I can do about it.
Yeah. Are there any other members that feel they're concerned about it? And in that case, can we include that then?
Are you voting to approve the amendment?
No. Oh, sorry.
Can you just make clear what we're voting on?
We're voting on the statement of gambling principles, including the amendments as adopted this evening. Yep. Yep. Well, I think we're in favour, apart from Chris. Sorry. You were against as well, so 2 against. Okay. Any abstentions? Well, in that case, it's carried. Thank you. Sean.
Yeah, Chair, so just to clarify, so we'll make those amendments to the policy, and the policy will then go to full council for consideration. It will be down to full council to make the final adoption of the policy, should they so wish to. So we'll make the amendments as recommended by the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Chair, could I be excused now? I think.
Yes, surely.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone. Thank you very much.
So are you going to be introducing the annual report, Sean?
Yes, I will do, Chair. Just to say that basically this is a report that comes to this meeting normally this time of year. Basically, there normally is a meeting around October. This is a report around the activity, basically, of both the committee and the licensing service in the previous financial year. So really the report sets out what that activity is, and in particular this year it talks about the effect of the COVID pandemic basically on the licensed sector, and I think we've tried to set out basically some of the impacts there in recognition of the fact that basically the sector has been impacted by the pandemic and at different levels. So obviously things like the licensed sector, pubs, restaurants, but there are very few elements of the sector that haven't been impacted, if any at all. So that sets that out. What you will see basically, and what I would just draw reference to, is the appendices. So on page Appendix B, basically, which sets out the total number of current licenses. it actually also sets out obviously the licenses that we talked about in relation to gambling premises, and you can see they're quite low. So in fact, actually, there's only 6 gambling premises as such, licensed gambling premises within the borough. There are a number of gaming machine permits and exemptions and things like that. But the key one I was going to mention basically was obviously the impacts, for example, on the numbers of taxi and private hire vehicles. And you can see that as you scroll down towards the bottom. So you've seen a reduction basically, for example, of Hackney carried vehicles of 86 or 92, in fact, a number of years earlier, down to 69 now, and a significant number of Hackney private hire vehicles down from 149 to 87. So it shows something now. I mean, what we don't know is whether that's a long-term effect or whether some of that trade will start to come back. I mean, what we are starting to see now is new drivers come and register with us and things like that. But what you haven't seen is effectively a significant fall off in drivers yet, and that I assume is because a number of them have 3-year licenses, so they are at the moment still licensed to drive should they wish to, and should they be up to date with all of their requirements on their license. So the annual report is there for the committee. I'm happy, as my colleagues are, to answer any questions about the activity of the service.
Does anybody have any questions? Rachel.
Thank you. I just wanted to check the satisfaction rating. So this is page 62. So we've got a target of 75% and then an outturn of 79% and a RAG rating of green. But yet 3 of the 4 quarters are well under the targets. We've got 50, 52%, 43%. So why is that rated green when for most of the year the target's been missed quite considerably?
To be honest, Councillor Burgess, I mean, the target is an annual target. So basically, and the reason why a lot of the figures came up. So basically, we did a lot of the survey in the last quarter, and that's what basically pushed that up. Is because obviously the service was heavily involved in COVID. Although we did some online surveys, basically we had a very low return rate in the first 3 quarters. And then basically in the last quarter, we had a real surge to go back through the businesses and everybody else that we'd worked with over the year. And that basically pushed the rating up. So the end of the year target was green. It was below the target basically for the first 3 quarters, but that was based on a very low return, basically kind of survey monkey returns, which very few people actually did. So at the end of the year, we actually phoned a lot of people.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you. Could I just ask one other question, Chair?
Sure.
It was with regard to the numbers of licences, so on page 64, it's quite striking how that's reduced. What are the budgetary implications of that, of having so many fewer licences and presumably licence fees that go with it? And how serious are the implications of that? Will it affect your service going forward?
Well, I mean, David Thrale is on the call, I believe. David is obviously leading on the project to bring the public protection services in-house, which will include licensing. But clearly there are budgetary implications. So, I mean, we all know what the fee is for a taxi, because a taxi or a private hire vehicle, because we've discussed that many times at this committee. So you can multiply that by the number of lost licenses, and it will give you a very good indication of the amount of money that's lost. As I say, we don't know how many driver licenses will be lost in due course. What we are seeing is certain other sectors, like, for example, the restaurants and licence sector, the Licensing Act 2003 sector is holding up. But the numbers of gambling premises, for example, are reducing as well. And each one of those kind of licenses it goes, there is a license, there is a fee implication, which basically, based on those losses of numbers, will amount to many tens of thousands of pounds. How that will be dealt with going forward, David, I believe you're on the call. Do you want to pick up that aspect of the the question, please?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Yeah, Sean's right that there has been a reduction in income as a result of the COVID pandemic, and it's something that no one really knows what the impact will be going forward. So for 2022-23, the service will have the same budget for income that we had in previous years, and we will just have to look and see how the COVID pandemic goes forward. I mean, even tonight on the telly, there's a debate about whether we're going to have a further measures to tackle rising numbers. But in terms of budgets, we are just holding steady and seeing what happens.
I guess if I could just add, Chair, so obviously as well, local authorities have received some support for lost income in the last 2 years, so last year and this year. I guess what none of us know at this stage is whether basically there will be any support going forward. But there are some early signs. I think it's fair to say, I mean, Julia may wish to comment that you know, people are coming back into the sector. We are seeing people who've taken vehicles off the road. In small numbers reappear basically, but I think the next 12 months will give much greater clarity as to whether this is a long-term position or basically whether it is there'll be some degree of bounce back.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. A comment and just a couple of quick questions. Firstly, on page 58, it's just a little typo. It's Councillor Ian Shenton, not Shelton. Just to take a little bit further, part of what Rachel was bringing up about the satisfaction. I know in here there's a lot of talk about complaints, which is obviously about premises and activities, but does the PPP service actually get any complaints as well? I mean, I know that we're looking at satisfaction board about sort of active stuff coming in, you know, how do people feel about the service that's being provided? And then moving on from that, obviously the change with Wokingham's relationship with the PPP, what impacts are we likely to see going forward with regards to licensing specifically? Is there anything that you're concerned about, anything you think we should be aware of, particularly when it comes to the budgetary aspect? You know, we've already, you know, it's been highlighted that there's a lot less licenses. Are there greater concerns in that regard as well? Thank you.
Chair, if I just pick up the first aspect, I don't know the figures about complaints about the service off the top of my head. I will get those and we will circulate those to the committee. What I would say is I believe they're very low. I mean, they're very low numbers in terms of the service itself. I mean, we obviously get a lot of complaints from the public about aspects of the various aspects of the licensed sector, and I don't think they're actually in the report, have you? But we can also circulate those as well. But I will get that information for you and I will get that circulated to the committee. I think the second part of the question about going forward again is one for David and who's building the new service for Wokingham.
Hello. Yes, we don't anticipate any problems. We're obviously planning to avoid that. We West Berkshire have nominated the staff that are working on licensing for Wokingham to be tupied over. So they will be joining us on the 1st of April. We created a licensing team that will have a greater capacity for customer delivery so that we can improve the initial response to licensees and residents around licensing. And we are bringing together customer delivery, admin, licensing officers and licensing processing officers all under the single licensing manager so that they will be able to have all the levers, as it were. That licensing manager will be accountable for licensing performance, so they will have all the staff that deliver licensing performance under their direct management. So we think that, we hope, and we're working towards that being a seamless transition process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you, Chair. It's really a further question following on from Rachel's about the licensing numbers. Are surrounding authorities, including West Berkshire and Bracknell, also seeing similar reductions in the amount of licensing over the similar period?
Yes, basically we've all seen, so across the three authorities that we're involved in, we've seen reductions in all three. What I would say is probably less so in West Berkshire but more so in Bracknell. So I think off the top of my head, and one of my colleagues will correct me, but I think literally in Bracknell, when it comes to the Hackney carriage fleet, literally half of the fleet is gone. So you've seen a reduction here, for example, of about 25%, but in Bracknell, in relation to the taxi fleet, it's halved. So I think this is an issue, basically, certainly in those authorities, and I suspect much beyond that as well.
Thank you. Shahid.
Thanks, Chair. Sean, just on the last point, you said half the drivers are gone. Have you looked into actually why there's such a large reduction?
Yeah, so I think what happened.
What is the reason? Is that something on our part we are not doing, or is that some other reason which are external to us?
So I think what's happened is intrinsically, obviously, the taxi and private hire trade have been linked to 2 or 3 sectors, really. One of them is the holiday industry, so airport runs and the like. The second, obviously, is their intrinsic link to hospitality and the nighttime economy in particular, much of which was closed for long periods. And the third one basically is corporate. And obviously with the significant reduction of international travel for business purposes as well, but also basically a lot more people working from home and new ways of working with a lot more kind of online working. I suspect basically that the amount of work basically has just significantly fallen. And I think what happened, talking to colleagues who are working with the licensed sector all the time, particularly taxi and private hire, I believe a lot of them went into other kind of areas. Some of them retired, some of them went into areas such as food deliveries, which obviously was a booming area. And some of them, I believe, are probably doing a bit of both. Yeah, I think that's basically it. I mean, time will tell, I guess, whether basically things like, obviously the international travel stuff is starting to come back. It will be interesting to see, you know, where it goes in terms of the corporate market. And in due course, obviously, with hospitality kind of starting to emerge, whether basically the numbers of drivers and the numbers of vehicles will then start to increase again.
Thank you. Right, well, this report is for information only. We don't need to vote on this one, so I think we move on to the next item, please, which is the taxi liaison meeting updates.
Chairman, sorry, this is Moira Fraser speaking. Unfortunately, I've got a lone laptop today, and I've just discovered during the meeting that I don't have a camera. So apologies that I can't see you while I'm speaking to you. I trust that everybody's had a chance to read the report. We had a very successful meeting with the trade in July. We've had an increase in the number of people attending. It's gone up to 5 now, which doesn't seem a great deal, but it is an increase in the number of members of the trade that are attending. We continue to promote the meetings to the trade and encourage more drivers and operators to come along should they choose to do so. The main issue that we would like members to consider at the meeting today is whether or not you'd like to consider suspending the age limit of vehicles for another year. At the trade meeting, the trade argued that the vehicles have travelled less miles during COVID. And therefore they felt that the period should be prolonged. It was explained at the meeting, and there was some debate around the fact that there are mechanisms within the current policy about extending the period for the vehicles should the vehicles meet the criteria. The other issue that the trade asked us to look at was about the inability to use the bus lanes in Reading. Officers have been speaking to our colleagues in Reading Borough Council, and they've told us that Wokingham taxis can use some of the lanes. But I think perhaps we need to have a discussion about whether or not we should be lobbying Reading more extensively and perhaps at a higher level. And the other issue that remains an ongoing issue for the trade is the impact that Uber is having on their business. We have looked at legal advice around this, and there's, you know, Uber has the right to trade in Wokingham, and really the authority can only take action where they are seen to be contravening the law. So if they're parking illegally or applying for hire, but again, we could have a discussion around that. The next meeting will take place on the 3rd of November, and you were talking a little bit about COVID and having a discussion with the drivers, so we could make sure that that's something that's included on the agenda for that meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any members have any questions? Michael?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for that. Very, very useful. I mean, it's good that the number of the trade are actually increasing as well, and hopefully the next meeting on the 3rd will be even more there, because I think it's important to engage. But I just want to raise the issue of bus lanes in Reading. And I understood, well, at least my understanding was that Wokingham cabs could use some lanes in Reading, but not others. I'm kind of thinking that's going to cause a lot of confusion, because they're thinking, I'm going to lose, I can use this one, oh no you can't, and then it's going to get some issues from that. So I'm just really, I mean, it's up to Reading what they do with their roads, but I think we should continue lobbying to open up all the bus lanes in Reading to Wokingham vehicles. I think I just make it sensible, easier and everything else, and certainly fairer.
Thank you. Rachel?
Thank you. I would like to just pick up on the point with regard to suspension of the age of vehicles. So as Moira said, the group overall recommended to the Licensing and Appeals Committee that the age of vehicles, sorry, the age limit be suspended for 1 more year. So I'd like to formally propose that this evening. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you.
Can we actually make a decision with regards to that division? Yeah, okay, well, it'd be a recommendation rather than a decision as such. Yes. Can I see, are there any other members want to speak on that particular issue? Sarah?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on an element in the report that related to this. It said members were also mindful of the fact that older vehicles were more polluting to the environment, and this needed to be considered in line with the climate emergency measures being adopted by the council. Fully appreciate that, but actually the effect on the climate of constantly changing cars is much greater than once the car's in circulation. So actually encouraging cars to be used for longer reduces the consumer emissions and the emissions used to actually manufacture the cars. So I don't think that really counts in this regard, and as such I'm more than happy to second and support what Rachel has recommended. Although, can I actually just get some clarification on something, because this is something that has confused me tonight. Is this committee not a decision-making committee? Can we get clarification on this? I've been trying to check the Constitution to understand, and I'm not clear on that.
Sean, I was going to say something, but perhaps you go first.
Yeah, I was only going to say, but obviously in respect of things like the recommendation that's or the proposal that's before the committee tonight, obviously the conditions that we're talking about are the committee's conditions, as I understand it. Therefore, it is within the gift of the committee basically to amend those conditions. I mean, unless anybody else has got a different view, that would be my understanding of it. The condition that we're talking about is a condition that was set by this committee. Julie, are you able to confirm that?
Yes, Sean, I agree with you.
Yeah, so I think you can. My view would be that you can make that amendment to your conditions, or suspend that condition.
And just to clarify, this can't be overruled by executive.
No, this is very much a licensing committee issue. Yeah. But
the one that we mentioned right at the beginning of the meeting could be overruled. So this is where the confusion's coming from.
Sorry. Yeah. So if you go back to the issue at the beginning of the meeting when we talked about fees, the committee's role in that respect was to basically review the results of the consultation and then to make a recommendation. With this one, basically, in terms of the conditions that relate to vehicles, the licence conditions, they are actually basically the committee's conditions that they set, and the committee can amend those conditions.
So some things we have decision-making power for, and other things we don't.
Yeah, you don't have decision-making powers on fees and charges, basically.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. are you indicating there, Lindsay? Is it on this particular topic?
Yes, it is on this because setting of fees is actually full council. The final decision making of fees is at full council, not the exec. So I think we need to have real clarification on that. And I would have thought that if there was something coming, it would have been an agenda on the exec and an exec meeting over the last month or two that would have discussed it, and I haven't seen anything on there. So I think I know we've got that being taken on. So I'm quite happy to support Rachel's amendment to extend the length of time on the vehicles. I speak to the taxi drivers who come to Twyford quite regularly, and they have made it very clear that whilst there's been a recovery in taxi business recently, they estimate, because I said how much do they reckon it is, and they say it's somewhere between 25 and 35% of what it was. It is coming up from lower, and some business is coming back, so it is slowly recovering. But the thing that they said about losing licenses and handing in their license there is some drivers have done that and they've handed them in, some have kept them, and a few have transferred to Reading. So there has been a sort of a little bit of a movement around, and I agree with Michael on the issue of the bus lanes and use of in Reading. It would be absolutely confusing as anything, be told you can go down this road but not that road. The only thing that I would agree with is if the bus lanes in Reading only allow buses down some road and not taxis at all, and it affects Reading taxis as well, that would be understandable. But if a Reading taxi is allowed to go down a road, we should be fighting for our Wokingham drivers to go down the same roads, because they're picking up business in the Wokingham area to go into Reading as much as Reading drivers are picking up people who are in Reading coming home in the evening to come into Wokingham. And I think they need to be treated even-handedly. And I think we, as an authority, should be pushing very hard and making it very clear to Reading that is not appropriate. Why don't we turn around to them and said you can't use the A329M?
Yeah, I think we've got to be very careful about this because it's not straightforward at all. Because does it include private hire vehicles, for instance, in Reading? I don't know whether it's just the black cabs that they allow to use it, or whether private hire vehicles are allowed to use it. Because if they are, then how do they actually carry that out in that respect? You know, so unless they're somewhere or another actually recording the number plates and checking them on that basis or not, I don't know. But I think we do need to look into a bit more detail with regards to that. Can I take Shahid first, and then I'll look Paul.
Thanks, Chair. I think I had a same issue regarding the bus lanes in Reading. I think one of the things which was picked up in the meeting is that Wokingham needs to, senior leadership of Wokingham needs to have the discussion with senior leadership of Reading Borough Council. So that was what was mentioned earlier on. So it needs to be perhaps at a senior officer or maybe at a directorate level, so they can come to some sort of understanding, because at the lower level, they are not actually moving forward. That was my understanding. I could be wrong. So I just want to know whether that discussion has taken place, or there's a plan to have that discussion, because that's certainly what the taxi drivers are expecting to the next move, right? So if not, then hopefully that is what is going to happen. Perhaps somebody can sort of comment on that. And secondly, the motion to extend the age limit, I think we just need clarification. What is that motion? Extending to what? How many years are we extending to? Or are we just suspending the decision for another year? So I wasn't very clear on that.
So, Chair, if I pick up on the first point, I think you're right. I think we've had discussions at officer level with Reading, and the suggestion I had that was made to me during the last discussion, which wasn't very long ago, the last exchange with Reading, was that basically this is probably something that needs to come to go to the relevant executive member in Reading, probably from the relevant member or senior officer in Wokingham. So we will follow that point up and look at basically contacting Reading through that route. But I think at this level we've probably done all we can. Just moving on to the second point about the age of the vehicles and what the extension will actually mean. Julie, you're probably best placed to pick that up.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. We're looking, members will recall that we're looking at developing the policy, the existing taxi and private hire policy. And as part of that, there will also be some suggestions of whether an age limit is appropriate anymore, whether members would like to consider a different age limit. You know, with the sort of the emergency climate and change that's has been brought in the council, you know, whether members feel that no age limit or a fixed age limit is appropriate is obviously something to be considered. But that will be coming back to you in the January committee, I believe. I think I'm right, Maura, for your consideration on that. So if members would want to extend what they've currently done so far until that report comes back to you to consider it more fully then, obviously before then going out to consultation with that. Would that help?
Bill.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask Sean what the situation is with our neighbouring boroughs as far as age of vehicle is concerned and what their plans are to do?
Yes. So we are taking the same kind of paper actually to all three authorities. Actually, it is varied, isn't it? Julie, do you want to just run through? I think West Berkshire have no limit.
West Berkshire don't have a limit. Bracknell do have a limit, which is 8 years for private hire vehicles and 10 years for hackneys.
Yeah. So obviously it's down to each authority basically to determine that limit that there is. That's the range that we've got, and Woking obviously has a limit.
Thank you.
I think there is a debate to be had actually, obviously, when we come back with this in January about this issue of limits, because obviously vehicles are built differently now. They last longer. They're built. You know, the usage may change going forward in terms of mileage. If this is a systemic, longer term, less kind of journeys and that type of thing. And there are other ways potentially of managing the safety and everything else, or the state of the fleet, I suppose, basically, than having limits. You could have conditions around actually condition as much as anything else, or testing, the frequency of testing and that type of thing. So we can bring all of that back in January, and I think have a really thorough debate about this.
Okay, Shahid, come back in.
Sorry, so you just kind of come back on that. Regarding the conversation with, sorry, let me start again. You know, there's a lot of other issues we actually have a common, understanding with our neighbouring authorities. I would have thought, because I would have thought we'd have something similar in this situation as well. Surely their cars use our roads and our cars their roads, right? So it doesn't make any sense from the residents' point of view that it'd be nice to have a consistency across, and that's was suggesting that when the senior level conversation happens, it can be brought up at that level to say, look, it make a better sense if we have some consistency across. I understand each authority is entitled to make their own decisions. I get that, but at the end of the day, we are all here to serve our residents, and we need to be considered. And secondly, in that part of the discussion, if we can also include the discussion, the black cabs, and also the other,
private hire.
Yeah, private hire. Both should be allowed to use the bus lanes as well, because that's a constant complaint from the private hires that they are stuck in the traffic, and the bus lane is totally empty, and they're losing business as a result of that. It doesn't make any sense at all. So in that conversation, perhaps this could be, a part of that conversation as well.
So, Chair, just on the issue of vehicles and consistency with the authorities, I mean, we have been working on consistency issues across a number of areas with neighbouring authorities. I mean, we did it 18 months ago, a couple of years back on the issue of convictions. So there are similar policies now, basically, across all the neighbouring authorities around convictions. Julia, if I'm right, what we're bringing forward now is some national guidance, isn't it, on conditions, and that's what we're looking to work with authorities to get some consistency across authorities on in relation to vehicles.
Yeah, so Jim Button is reviewing all three policies. In order to get some consistency, as members have been suggesting, and as Sean said, very much the age of the fleet for private hire and hackney carriage, and also of school vehicles will very much be looked at. And obviously we don't have a great deal in terms of electric vehicles in the current policy in Woking. And that's something we need to look at further as well, and trying to encourage that side of things.
So, Chair, just on this issue then of age of vehicle, I wonder whether basically the recommendation to the committee for adoption is that the age of vehicle condition is suspended for 1 more year, or to such time as the new conditions are in place, whichever is I suppose if the conditions are in place earlier, then we can pick it up at that point, or 1 more year. If the committee is looking for a recommendation to adopt.
Yeah, what do members feel about that? You happy to support that? Can I see all those in favour of that? Yes, sure.
I don't really understand what we're doing. This is a taxi liaison meeting update, and we're receiving the update. We can't suddenly start voting on things. And
No, I thought
we can't recommend to the committee. We are the committee. All we need to do is to make it known that we'd like these two things to be debated at the January meeting. I think it's as simple as that. No one would object to that. Well, I don't think we can resolve anything.
Okay, so we'll bring forward a paper to the January meeting, basically with the decision paper basically to be made around the extension of the 1 year for consideration by the committee.
I'm a bit puzzled. I thought we asked only a few minutes ago whether we could do this, and SEN said yes.
That's what I
Sorry,
thought.
can I just clarify? Sean, am I right in thinking that this amendment to the policy and the policy will have to be agreed by council ultimately after this committee recommends it?
No.
Julia, do you have a view on that?
So yeah. I think, Chairman, if I could say that, there seems to be some confusion. There's the taxi policy. The draft taxi policy will come to the January licensing committee meeting. It will then go up to consultation. It will come back to licensing, and then full council will have to adopt the taxi policy. I think that what we're talking about is an amendment to a specific condition. And that's a separate issue that we could bring in until such time as that policy is adopted.
Yeah, I thought that's what we were talking about earlier. And we had the response from Sean saying that we could actually vote with regards to that particular issue. Is that right, Sean?
What I was saying was that it is in the gift of this committee to change that condition or to suspend that condition. The mechanism, I suppose, is something quite different, and that is something obviously we'll need to. So the view that that's just been put forward is it probably needs to come forward with a formal paper with a formal recommendation for consideration. That position is suspended. Can I just ask colleagues about? So it has been suspended already. When was it suspended to?
30th of September.
Okay, right.
So it's no longer suspended at the moment. We're past that period. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to check with Sean on whether we're actually able to.
I think you're
at this moment, or whether you wanted to carry it forward.
I think your Democratic Services Office is probably going to have to advise on that from a constitutional point of view.
Chair, if it is suspended until 30th of August, that means, there needs to be made whether it should be continue to be suspended or basically, or by default, it is active. So, where are we with that? So I think there's an issue here for us to address straight away, isn't there?
Can I just ask Rachel, is it on this particular topic you want to speak, Rachel? Yeah.
Yeah, it was just to say that I made the proposal about 10, 15 minutes ago to suspend it, and for another year, and then Sean sort of reiterated that that was a sensible proposal. It was seconded, so could we move to a vote on that?
Well, that's what we've had various interruptions coming in between. So are members happy to actually vote on that particular topic at this moment in time? Can I just, Chris, you're saying it's against the Constitution?
I'm not an expert. I'm suggesting that maybe it's a very simple matter. It's not on the agenda.
Yes.
You can't suddenly invent something and vote on it when it's not on the agenda. But to help out, if it is urgent, you are allowed to, as chairman, you can raise urgent matters. It says that in the agenda.
Yeah, great.
Sorry, but that is really unreasonable, and this was agreed and discussed at the taxi liaison group, at which I think you were at. So to say it's just been invented is completely untrue. I have within my rights to propose something at a public meeting. That's what I'm doing. If we want to amend that proposal to say subject to any constitutional, issues, well, we can put something in about that. But I'm within my rights to do this, and it's not been invented. It was discussed with the trade and agreed by that group and recommended to this committee, which was why I've raised it.
What do you think about that from our position here?
Well, my understanding is that ultimately it's council that decides on policies, and they would have to ultimately agree to changes. Now, I would personally recommend that this is already being discussed at the January meeting. So you could put a recommendation for the report that's coming in January, but it's up to the committee to decide.
Rachel?
Sorry, but as Shahid has already pointed out, we need to decide what happens now, because otherwise what happens in the intervening period?
Yeah.
We have 3 months where it goes back to what it was before. Also, it's already been suspended. So under what powers has it already been suspended? Because I don't think that went to full council.
Julia, do you have a view on this?
I was just trying to rack my brains to see if the policies actually went to full council, but it is a long time ago. But certainly we've made the interim decisions at this committee, haven't we?
Yeah, I don't think it is a matter for. I don't think it is a matter for full council. The conditions are set by this committee. If you think back to, for example, the driver conviction conditions that came to the committee, they didn't go anywhere else. Basically, that was a matter for the committee under the Constitution. The question is, I guess the question that's being raised tonight is not, I don't think it's a matter of whether the committee can vary the condition. I think it's a matter of the mechanism, or suspend the condition. I think it's a matter of the mechanism that seems to be under debate. Can I suggest, if there is a lack of clarity, one thing we could do is to accept that the committee recommends that the condition is varied, and I go away as a matter of urgency tomorrow to look at the best route for doing that. And if necessary, we could either have a very urgent meeting to do that, or see if there's some of the delegated authority for doing it. I can't think of any other way forward right now.
Yeah. Phil, what did you think?
Yeah, can I just suggest that as we've gone past the date of the 30th of September, this does become an urgent matter, and therefore the chairman can make a decision.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Even more so because we've got a liaison meeting on the 3rd of November.
And it does say, I'm just looking at the Constitution here, 8.4.1a, we are carrying out functions relating to licensing and registration as specified in Schedule 1 of the Local Authorities Regulations 2000. There are other parts to this where it says delegated by council, but this isn't one of those. It looks like from the Constitution, this is something within our remit. We can decide. It is relating to an agenda item, and a proposal has been made and seconded, so we should be able to vote on it.
Yes.
We were looking at exactly that point, Sarah. So I think we'd have to double check to see that is one of those things. And it seems that Sean is confident that it is within the remit of this committee. So I'd suggest that we do go ahead. And if subsequently it's found out that further approval is needed, we could arrange for a special council executive committee, which could meet quite quickly to implement this decision.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So would you like to just tell us your proposal again, Rachel, so we know exactly now what members have got to vote on this?
I propose that we suspend the age limit for a further year.
Thank you. Right, can I see all those in favour, please? Right. Everyone? Oh, no, one abstention there. Are you abstaining, Parry, or are you against?
Chairman, there's so much confusion. I'm abstaining, yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I think that the vote is carried. We have no further discussion with regard to that. Rachel.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up a few other points arising from the briefing, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
There were a few things that aren't reflected here that I just wanted to make members aware of. With regard to Uber, I think it was agreed that, because we've written to TfL about this, but hadn't had a response. So it was actually agreed that there would be some try to get an actual conversation with TfL about it, to try and get that conversation going. And I'm sure Julia's aware of that. With regard to the fee structure, it's not noted here, but it was raised again about the audit on the fee structure. So this was recommended by an internal audit over 2 years ago now, and it still hasn't taken place. It was stated at the liaison meeting that this would come to the October meeting, i.e. this meeting, so it would be good to get an update on that. It does feel like I ask about this audit every meeting and it never happens, so it'd be really good to get something concrete on that. And thirdly, one of the members of the trade actually very eloquently raised a point about school transport, and it was also agreed that a review of whether school transport should be treated in a sort of special way, as I believe it is in Bracknell, would also come to this meeting, but there isn't obviously anything on the agenda tonight. So it would be good to get an update on those 2 points. I would agree actually with Moira's comments earlier that the meeting was improved compared to previous meetings though.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Do you want to respond to that, Gloria?
Shall I come back on the first one?
Yeah.
Councillor was raised on the attempts to get some communication going or some dialogue going with Transport for London. I have tried on numerous occasions, it probably won't surprise you to know, to telephone them, to try and speak to somebody in a position to have a sensible conversation with. And unfortunately, I have failed dismally. I've also sent emails following up on our letters that we have sent, and we've also sent them from the other two authorities. And again, no one comes back to me. So I will promise faithfully to try again this week and see if I can get any further. But if I could have a name, I don't know if anybody would know of a name of somebody that I could contact to try and speak to them, then that would help, and I'd be very grateful. So that's that bit. Sean wants to follow up on the fees side of things.
Yeah. Does anybody have any suggestions for that? No. Rachel?
Sorry, could I get an officer response on the point about the fee structure and about the home to school transport, please?
I don't know about the homeschool transport fees. I wasn't at the meeting, the liaison meeting. What I don't even know. I don't know what the Moira, are you able to pick that up?
Sorry, Chairman, I'm not sure if you're talking about the fees or the treatment of the trade, because I think the treatment and the policy will be wrapped up in the taxi policy that we've got coming through. They did ask for a reduction in fees, and the discussion that was held with officers around the fees is that it still takes the same. Their argument is that they trade for fewer days, therefore they should pay a reduced fee. And the the setting of fees is based on the time taken to process the application, and there isn't felt that there is a great deal of difference. There's no difference in the process that's undertaken to license the homeschool people than it is to do the normal licenses, and therefore it was felt that it wasn't appropriate to set a different fee.
Could I just add to that, Chairman, please? Yeah, as Moira alluded to there, the homeschool transport and provision of such will also be coming back to the committee in January, because it will all be wrapped up in the one policy.
Okay. Cool. Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit confused. Where is this going now with the going forward on the bus lane? Because at the moment we've got a report in front of us, but we've discussed about the bus lane and potential taking action at a much higher level of what is actually going to happen. Because we haven't made a decision about anything if you want us to make a decision.
Chair, I will undertake to basically find out. I've already established who the relevant executive member is in Reading, so I've made that contact. I've been identified who the person is that we need to contact. I will undertake myself basically to make sure that, or to work with the relevant officer or member at Wokingham Council, Wokingham Borough Council, basically to make those representations on behalf of the committee.
Could I just propose that from this committee?
Well, we need to be careful with regards to this, because we don't actually have any powers to deal with that. It's up to the individual authorities. You know, we can't dictate to Reading what they should be doing.
Chair, my proposal is that this committee supports officers and the executive member at the highest level to discuss with the equivalent at Reading Borough Council to allow registered Wokingham Borough Council vehicles to use the designated bus and taxi lanes in Reading Borough, the same as what Reading Borough has.
Chair, and what I'm hearing, Chair, is that basically on a number of grounds, one of which is environmental and the other one basically is on the grounds of competition and fairness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll take.
Yeah, that needs to. I don't know why do we need a seconder with regards to that? This is something we're just asking the officers to deal with. It's not a.
Well, Chair, can I suggest that we undertake to do that and we bring back the results of that representation to the committee in January?
Yeah, I mean, I feel concerned about this. I do know that, for instance, that the leader of the council spoke to the deputy leader of Reading some months ago on this particular issue and didn't make any progress at that stage with regards to that. But I think it was just a part of a conversation. It wasn't an issue. So I think that the problem that we've got, we can't trade with them very easily because we have very few bus lanes in Wokingham. And so we're not offering a like-for-like recommendation with regards to that. So we've got to be careful. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's not straightforward as a reciprocal agreement because we don't obviously have the extent of bus lanes, but it sort of defeats the point at the end of the day from a consumer point of view. Journeys do not end at boundaries. And may I suggest that it might be sort of senior officer level that do this? Maybe it's down to the right person with the right approach that this is done, and it's for the benefit of residents. And that's how it's framed. Because if we're looking at, well, we'll give you some of our bus lanes, but you haven't got many. I mean, that's ridiculous. We've got to look at the customer. You know, we are talking about being a customer-centric authority, and I would hope that Reading would be the same. So if we keep in mind the customer in these conversations, please. Thank you.
Yes, we have to be careful with regards to this because, as far as I'm aware, Reading are trying to be helpful to their own taxi drivers themselves in doing this, and the taxi drivers from Reading are saying they don't want anybody else to be getting that privilege as well. So it can get into an issue that's not really something that we should be involved with regard to that. We do have to try and stick to a sensible level so that these things are not interfered with by various groups and so forth. With regard to that, we've got to look for a fair decision from that point of view. But, I think Sean now probably understands what we're asking you to do with regards to that on that basis.
Yeah. I will make the undertaking on the basis that this is what the trade have asked for, and I will report back to the committee basically, and what the committee have asked for, and I'll report back to the committee with the outcome of that in January.
Rachel.
Thank you. I didn't get an officer response to one of my other points about the audit of the methodology of the fee structure. So we were told at the liaison meeting that would be coming to this meeting. So could I have an update on that, please?
Did you hear that, John?
I did. I wasn't at the liaison meeting, Moira. You were, I believe, or Julia.
I think, Sean, the methodology was set out in the papers that went to the Joint Public Protection Committee, so we can pass those on to the members. There's no problem with doing that.
Yeah, and we do have a breakdown of the 5 hours, Councillor Burgess, which I'm sure we've discussed with the trade before, actually, basically where that 5 hours was made up from, the various aspects of that. Of course, going forward, and David's on the call, obviously, basically this methodology, David, will be reworked, won't it, as you start to look at your own systems in Woking, which are going to be quite different from the existing systems over time.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Yeah, so initially the systems will be, the processes will be exactly the same. We're going to bring over this computer system that the partnership uses, and we will be using that computer in year 1 and possibly in year 2 as well. We have capital funds set aside for a new system, a bit like the partnership have done. They've gone with a new provider, which I think they're going live with in April. So Wokingham will be a little bit behind that because of the termination, but as soon as that is ready and ready for go live, there will be a lot of automation benefits that come from that, and automation will mean a review of fees, hopefully in the downward direction. But in the year 1, the first year of the service, things will carry on largely unchanged as regards time and fees and costs.
Thank you. No further questions? In that case, there are no further items on the agenda, no urgent items. I formally close the meeting. Thank you, everybody.